Welcome, everybody. See people coming in. While we wait for everyone to get started, why don't you put your title and where you're at? See how many people are having a 7:30 webinar and how many people just finished classes. I'd love to know what kind of titles we have, since this is literacy and science. The New Yorkers already. Indiana. New Zealand, very nice. So good to see everybody. South Carolina, I'm in North Carolina. Well, while we're getting started, let's go ahead and go through some housekeeping stuff. But welcome everyone to Science Connections, Accelerating Learning in Science with the Science of Reading. We're very excited to have this crossover webinar today with Susan and Eric. And to help you make the most of this webinar, we have some tips for you. If you would like to access closed captioning, please hit the little CC button in the bottom tray and then show subtitles, and you should see those pop up. You can participate and make comments at any time through the chat. And you can also submit questions. The best way to get your questions answered is to submit them through the Q&A function, and we will try to have dedicated Q&A time at the end. I know our webinar is going to be packed today, but we're going to try to answer as many questions as possible. And you will receive a certificate of attendance with your webinar recording via Zoom email and then via another follow-up email from us. So to get started, we're going to tell you a little bit more about our presenters today. If some of you may already know Science Connections, Eric Cross is the host of the Science Connections podcast, and we're now doing some Science Connections webinars, which is very exciting. He's also a 7th grade science technology teacher, grade level lead, and digital learning innovator for Albert Einstein Academies. And I lost my slide. He's become an empowered leader in and out of the classroom and has done great work building meaningful, accessible learning experiences centered around student agency. We love seeing all this wonderful stuff he does. And joining him today is Susan Lambert. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Susan already. She is the host of the Science of Reading podcast and Chief Academic Officer of Elementary Humanities at Amplify. She's also a former classroom teacher, administrator, curriculum developer. She's done it all. She's dedicated to exploring research around how reading is best taught, bring theory into best practices for educators, and showcasing national models of instruction excellence. We're so excited to have both of them today. And so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Susan to get started.
I'm here. I am trying to do all the buttons, get my camera on, get my video on. Oh my goodness. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to share my screen and let's get this thing started. How are we looking? Eric, do we have a slideshow here? Can you see it?
You look great. Slideshow looks great. You're good to go.
All right. I appreciate it. And for those of you that have joined us, you should know that this is a real treat for Eric and I, and for you. This is the first time 2 crazy podcast hosts have presented in a webinar together, and we're so excited about it. We're just really excited about how we can use the science of reading to accelerate science. So I thought we would start with a couple of things. We're going to review some foundations about what do we mean by the science of reading, and we're going to start putting an extension into academic language. In other words, how does the science of reading, which seems like an ELA thing, actually have something to do with the content area of science, and what does that mean for student learning? So I'm going to cover the first 2 bullet points, and I'm going to try to do that, at a pretty good clip so that we can give a lot of time to Eric in terms of how to apply this. And we are really going to attempt to leave some time for Q&A, although we do have a lot to talk about. So before we get started, I just want to talk just a little bit about comprehensive literacy, because if you are involved in the science of reading world at all, You know that there's a misconception that when we're talking about the science of reading, we're just talking about reading. We're actually not. So a reminder about comprehensive literacy. And this is going to make sense as we get further in and start talking about academic language and academic literacy. But remember, when we develop the skills in literacy, there's sort of two forms. There's receptive language, that's the language that we take in, and there's this expressive language. And the interesting thing about how literacy develops is we actually develop receptive language before expressive language, and we develop oral language first. And so if we look at oral language through the lens of receptive and expressive, we know that listening is really important. Babies start to do this before they're even born. We know expressive language is important. This starts to develop when children are very, very young. When we look through the lens of written language, we know that reading is sort of the next step in this journey. That starts to happen before school starts. We develop some of those prerequisite skills, but we start instruction in reading in the early grades, and writing, that other expressive, is the most difficult thing we actually have our students do. But all four of these are really important in terms of literacy, and we're going to see that connection then to the content area of science. Just a quick reminder, and I don't know how many of you are listeners to Science of Reading, the podcast, but when we talk about science of reading, we talk about a vast interdisciplinary body of research. So it's not just from the world of linguistics, or it's not just from the world of cognitive science, it's neuroscience and all kind of different areas. And it's really issues related to reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And this research has been collected for over 5 decades. So we're not talking about new research. We're talking about research that started, and we continue then to sort of validate that and move that research forward. Thousands of studies, multiple languages. So this is not a United States thing or an English speaking thing. We really look for a preponderance of evidence. And I sort of feel like, because this is a science-focused webinar, we don't have to talk about scientific process, but we're just not looking at what people think. We're really looking at that preponderance of evidence. And it's really all about the prevention of and the intervention for reading difficulties. So the very first thing we want to talk about is prevention, but then we also need to look through the lens of intervention. I promise there's going to be a connection here. So one of the frameworks that we often look at, and there's many frameworks for the science of reading, but one of them that we look at is called the simple view of reading. And essentially what this says is that a skilled reader or skilled reading is the product of two important factors: language comprehension and word recognition. So this is not just about phonics instruction or teaching kids how to decode words. There's actually this really critical factor of language comprehension, where we're going to see how content areas play a huge role in this. And so these two factors are really important to be a skilled reader. Now, when we're talking about, you can see this is called Scarborough's rope, and you can see here at the top, you can see language comprehension, which is one of those factors, word recognition, which is another factor, and you see over here on the right-hand side, sort of skilled reading. You'll notice language comprehension, how much is involved with that. And we're going to pay particular attention to the knowledge and vocabulary side. And again, this webinar is not about teaching kids how to read. This webinar is about teaching comprehensive literacy skills and how that relates to language comprehension. Great definition that I pulled out from the year 2000, right? A reader can read a text for multiple things, right? You can read to find out new information. Eric's going to talk a little bit about how that's relevant in science instruction. You can also read just for fun. But the purposes of reading requires two abilities. Sound familiar? You need to understand something about language, and you need to understand something about print. And those two things really helps you make meaning of text. And that's our ultimate goal, right? Is to help kids make meaning of text. So back to a little bit of the simple view of reading. Really quickly, language comprehension is the thing that's we are born with. We are born to be communicators. And before, like I said, we're even born, we start to take that language in and start to hear that language. And that includes the sounds of the language, words in the language, meaning of the language. And as we start to practice that hearing, we start to speak that language. And young kids have to practice with this. And this happens over time. Word recognition is the thing that is not naturally developing. This requires systematic, explicit instruction in the English code. Language comprehension, we often call unconstrained skills. There's no limit, there's no ceiling to how well you can comprehend the language, how much knowledge you can gain, how much vocabulary you can gain. Word recognition, on the other hand, are constrained skills. That means all you have to do is learn these things and you're essentially done learning them. And the quicker that we can do that in the word recognition side, the better we're going to be at both reading and writing. So, language. If I were to ask you for a definition of language, could you define it? And I think this is one of the things that's most difficult for teachers to define. And it's one of those things that is the most important as we talk about the classroom environment, both teaching and for learning. With a quick Google, here's what I found. Google says that language is the principal method of human communication, consisting of words used structured and in a conventional way, conveyed by speech, writing, or gesture. And it's a system of communication. Now you think about that, right? We use language all the time. Every single day in multiple ways. And when you start to think about what that language looks in the classroom, we talk about the importance of academic language, which is where we're going today, is to help kids develop academic language. Well, what is that? Well, academic language are those skills. It's the skills that allow children to understand and use that more formal language that we privilege in school environments and in texts. So academic language is the language of schooling that's critical for kids to gain new knowledge and impact their learning. So again, we're going to look at these strands of early literacy development. There's lots more in language comprehension. I'm going to focus on the knowledge and vocabulary part, and Eric is going to take that knowledge and vocabulary one step further and talk about it in the context of science instruction. Hugh Katz, very famous researcher, he reminds us that chief among the factors influencing reading comprehension is background knowledge. So the more that you actually know about a topic before you read that in a text or engage in that in some kind of learning, the more you're going to learn, the faster you're going to learn, and the more you're going to understand. It just makes learning sticky. And remember, in science instruction, there is an element of reading comprehension. You're going to be interacting with texts and kids are going to be writing in response to what they're learning. That's all important part of literacy. And so background knowledge is really important. The American Educator, Winter 2021 issue. You have to get this one. It's really good. Eric, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I wonder if you've read it. And if you haven't, you need to. It's a science issue. And in this science issue, Hugh Katz actually talks about rethinking how to promote reading comprehension. And he says, knowledge must accumulate over time to ensure a level of depth that allows for critical analysis over the subject matter. You can't just learn something one day and actually be able to critically analyze it. It means that knowledge comes in layers, and kids need lots of different kinds of exposure to new knowledge and to new content over time in order to really be able to use that knowledge critically and in a critical analysis kind of way. Vocabulary plays a really key role in this, right? Because you can't actually know content. You can't know something about a subject without having the associated vocabulary. And vice versa, if you have knowledge, if you have vocabulary about a particular content area or a particular topic, you have then knowledge of that particular topic. And Nancy Hennessy reminds us that the primary goal of vocabulary, even though it's got a high impact on comprehension, should really be about developing this academic lexicon, this academic language, so that we can use that language so that students can talk about it, they can listen about it, they can read about it, and they can express it orally and in writing. So remember those 4 elements of literacy. This vocabulary and background knowledge helps with all of those. All right, here's a word. I'd like you to get a picture in your head of what this word represents. All right, you ready? Is it a noun that you have in your image about a spring, or is it a verb? Maybe it's one of these. Hopefully it's one of these. There's probably others, right? These multiple meaning words. But you can see how when you have knowledge of, let's say, the season of spring, you know the kind of flowers that are associated with the season of spring, you're going to have one particular view in that content area. But if you're thinking in a mechanical content area, you think of maybe this spring, this boing boing spring, right? And so you're going to have a different kind of knowledge when you bring that vocabulary word to bear. Or when you think of a frog that springs out of the air, another kind of associated content. So one word, multiple meanings, and 3 different content areas that could be associated with that. So some comments about vocabulary. We know it's highly predictive of reading comprehension. When you know the words in the passage, you can actually you can comprehend that passage better. It's really the bridge between these knowing how to pronounce the word and read the word to this more cognitive process or learning process of comprehension. And it's through words that we actually build, refine, and modify our knowledge. And so what makes that vocabulary valuable isn't just the words in isolation, but the understandings that they unlock. Think again about that word spring, right? If you think of a content area that's associated with, that's the idea here. So how do we develop academic knowledge? Well, there's a few ways. We have to remember that what we put in front of kids to read and interact with actually matters. And when I say this to educators, they're like, well, of course it matters. But do we actually expect kids to learn the things that they're reading about? For some of us as ELA teachers, it was always, oh, let's find the main idea in details. Oh, let's compare and contrast this, right? It's strategies, which are super important to help with comprehension, but the ultimate goal of that text that we put in front of kids should always be that they learn what's in the text, because those comprehension strategies aren't generalizable, both from text to text and from content area to content area. And we also need extended time on a topic. And I'm sure Eric's going to talk a little bit about that kind of engagement we need kids to interact with to actually learn something over time. Remember the Hugh Katz article, right? Knowledge develops over time and sort of in layers. And with vocabulary, we need to expose kids to these definitions and contexts, and they're equally important. And we have to do that with a level of breadth and a level of depth, because this deep processing of those words helps build this web to connect information. And the more of a web that you build, when you engage either hearing content, working with content, reading content, it makes those things really sticky. And those webs end up capturing that information or grabbing that information and storing them in long-term memory. And again, one more time, extended time in, notice I say in, not on a topic. So we're not covering, it's not coverage, but it's engagement with students and the ability for those students then to be drawn in. Comprehensive literacy, this is a review. We're getting ready to throw this over to you, Eric. So be on cue here. Comprehensive literacy is all about listening, speaking, reading, and writing. It's also the modes of learning. That's how we take in information. We hear information, we talk about information, which deepens our knowledge. We read about things and we write about things, which also deepen our knowledge. So keep that in mind. This idea, comprehensive literacy that we're trying to develop in our students is also related to some of the modes of learning. And with that, I am going to throw it over to you, Eric. I hope I prepared you for what's to come next. Did I do okay?
You did phenomenal. That was amazing. I feel like I was a student again, back in my grad school days. That was great.
Awesome. All right. Well, I can't wait to learn from you. So you take it over.
All right, let's shift up. How are we doing on slides?
Looking good. Looking
All right.
good.
Let's get the video panel up. Here we go. So one of the questions we ask is, we have all this information about literacy and reading, writing, speaking, communicating. And then what does this look like practically in a science classroom? How do we do this with students? And what I'm going to talk about is some of the things that I've been doing, and it's based on this research. Now, one of the fortunate things that I had was I had literacy professors that told me that we were all teachers of literacy. And 10 years later, it's something that's always been in my mind, and it's been invaluable in seeing a difference in my students in their application of science learning, in their application of literacy development. So starting off, activating students' prior knowledge. Our students come in with funds of knowledge from different backgrounds. And when we use phenomena, which is basically just an observable event, we're able to see what our students are bringing to the table. We're able to see what they know and leverage that to help build new knowledge. And as Susan was saying, knowledge being something that we need to go deep with, it's cyclical, it's something that we need to spend time on so it builds. When we're able to elicit that from our students, we're able to take them further in their science understanding. And so phenomena, as you can see, some of the gifts on the screen that I have on here, if you were ever a little kid and you had friends that had you on a cardboard box or a sled, the one on the left is definitely totally relatable. But even simple things like boiling water, seeing your breath on a cold day, using Wi-Fi, cooking eggs, all of these things, whether we realize it or not, are based around science. Our students are living and breathing this literally every single day. And looking at this and asking questions and seeing what our students wonder about is a great way to start. From there, being able to build background knowledge. So some of the 3 best ways to do that is informational text. Some of the text that is used right now, especially with Common Core in the US, about 50%, and Susan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think by 4th grade needs to be nonfiction reading. And as they get older and progress through the grade levels, the percentage actually increases. Informational text is a great way for our students to be able to apply their literacy skills in a context, oftentimes that's already relevant to you. And I don't know, science teachers, those of you who are watching right now, I know you know this, oftentimes our students, we have that built-in engagement. So many times we have this context where our students are bought in. They have questions about the way the world works, and informational texts are a great way to be able to have them learn about it. And literacy helps them access it. Videos and simulations, especially nowadays with TikTok and YouTube. And yeah, I said TikTok because there's a lot of things on TikTok right now that are great little bites for students for phenomena or just explaining science teaching that's going on right now. And then simple experiments. There are so many different experiments that we can do for our students that may not come in with knowledge about a particular phenomena, but we can create that on the spot. And one of the most exciting things for me as a science teacher is when a student doesn't have an experience in a science subject I'm about to teach. Oh, it's the best because I get to be the first one to craft that experience for them. So whether we're activating prior knowledge of experiences that they might have, or we're trying to build new knowledge with informational text, videos and simulations, or simple experiments, we're able to kind of equip our students with a foundation that they need to take them to where we want to go, which is really deeper learning and moving them higher up that depth of knowledge. Now, as you can see in this AI generated image, if you might have seen my images as I'm trying to avoid pillaging Google images, I tried to be intentional about this, having the informational text, the videos and simulations, and simple experiments for anyone who wasn't able to see that. Spend a little bit of time with AI and generating this image. I think this question and these strategies more than ever are probably the most important to me. Culturally responsive teaching. If teaching is like a meal, then it would be a potluck. And all of our students are bringing different things to the table. And starting off with that mentality of seeing that the assets our students bring to the classroom, support everyone. And oftentimes as educators, it's easy to see what our students may not bring to the table because of language challenges or learning differences. But viewing the backgrounds of our students as assets, I think that mindset from the beginning is an important place to start, especially as an educator who's in the classroom, because so much of what we do is based around how we perceive our students and what we feel. There is so much of us that is influencing how we teach our students. So much of what Eric brings to the table, what Eric is feeling on a certain day, and how Eric perceives the students. And so when I see my students as bringing in assets, not deficits to the table, for example, if I have a student that's raised in a rural agricultural community, shout out to Iowa that's out there. Iowa, you're in my slides a couple times, because when I was at NSTA, I went to a great session from people from Iowa. They're likely to have a deep knowledge about the way the natural world interacts. They're going to have knowledge about agriculture, ecology, earth science, and biology. Next, the local community. Many of the cultures that our students have in our classrooms are collectivistic cultures. Community and knowledge is often built in relationship to other people. We live in a very hyper individualistic society, oftentimes in America, but what we have to remember is that language is really only useful when we're communicating with other people. And as Susan said, building that oral fluency first starts with talking oftentimes with someone else, especially as little kids. And so as we have a community that our students are in, we can bring those science topics, those issues, those things that affect real world problems, whether it's diabetes, whether it's asthma, low crop yields, invasive species. Depending on what part of the world you're in, there are certain things that impact your community in a different way. And when we are talking about science in a context that's relevant to our students, we see a higher level of engagement. Next is cultural storytelling. Cultural storytelling is a great way to present science problems and concepts. When we use fictional characters, when we use people of the same background as our students, when we bring in local professionals that reflect what our students' languages that they speak, we see a deeper level of engagement, especially when our students see people in positions of doing science that they may not have ever seen before. So when we're able to bring in people that can relate to our students, in the minds of our kids, it triggers something, it activates something. They see themselves in an older role. And representation is a big deal, regardless of the culture. We're not just talking about ethnicity, sex, gender, all of those things. All of us belong to different cultures and communities. Even if it's just the region of the world you live in, certain areas of my state in California have different cultures. And so students seeing people who look like them and whatever identity that they occupy is really, really important. Next, providing multilingual resources. We have a beautiful array of students that speak multiple languages in our classroom. Being intentional about providing access to those resources in the languages that our students speak is critical. We know that the data shows that the more our students can improve their native language or their mother tongue, the more proficient they become in that, the more proficient they can become in speaking a new language. And so as we're building their literacy skills in their native language, it will also supplement building their language skills for us in the US, English, and then in other countries, depending on what the national language is. That research helps support that language development as well. And then last, allowing students to see their background in the content, making sure that our content reflects who our kids are, whether it's case studies, science contributions, data, ensuring that our students are reflected in the curriculum makes a big difference. Next, how do we get our students writing? One of the ways is interactive science notebooks. This is a tried and true method. Now, this is also an AI image generated science notebook. So you might notice that it didn't do well spelling inputs and outputs, but I like the visual. Science notebooks are a way for students to document their learning in science. It lets students engage in content that's hands-on by writing, but each student in this case would have their own notebook. They put in their observations, their experiments. It's personalized to the students. And some of the activities involve writing, drawing, diagramming, all of these different learning modalities. And what this does is it gives essentially a way for students to document their learning throughout the course of a year. And in the end, they have this comprehensive book where they can see their learning journey. And then you can see as an educator how they've made sense of certain things. It allows students to go back and revisit or build on their previous knowledge. And students take ownership of the notebooks, especially when they can personalize it. And we as teachers are the ones who help guide it. One of the common methods of doing it is in one side of the notebook, they put the input, which would be what you teach them. And on the right side of the notebook, they put the output, which is how they make sense of it. This is a really, really popular tool with educators in science classrooms. I'm sure many of you have done interactive science notebooks. It's also a way for our students to be able to build their writing, reading skills. Now, if you want to take a step further, and this is what I've been doing in my classroom, digital notebooks and digital portfolios are what I've been doing. What I've noticed and what we've seen in data is that students tend to have a higher level of engagement, and they have a higher level of, I want to call it mastery development when they're presenting for a genuine audience. And so what students do in my class is they have digital notebooks. So we use Google Sites, and I have a student build a website in the beginning of the school year. And then each science activity that we do that is a production, they put into their digital portfolio. I'll show you an example. So this is Oliver's. Oliver's long grown now. His digital portfolio. He simply made pages for each of his classes. And for science, we had 7 or 8 different activities that we did. And he put in each project into his digital notebook. Now, the great thing about this is that students have access to everybody's digital notebook. So the fun thing is that they are content creators, not just consumers, but they are also looking at other websites to be able to improve their own. So it's iterative, it's mastery based. They're seeing other students' writing styles. They're seeing other people's syntax, how long they write, how much, what details they include, and they can go back and update theirs. This is an ongoing process that they do through the entire year. Everything is transparent. And by the time they're done, they have this beautiful website that showcases their work. So in the very beginning, we had a My Scientist poster where I have students create a scientist in Canva. Then they do a bacteria lab where they swab agar plates and they record, they take photos, and then they record their data and answer some questions. And there's a few other projects that I'll talk about a little bit later that they embed in here. But by the time they're done in this example, they had about 9 different projects that they've done. Now, once I've posted everybody's website onto a spreadsheet and they can see everyone's, I have students vote on their favorite website. And then I put a little crown emoji in the spreadsheet so that they get the little crown, so everyone knows that they're the ones that are the great ones. And you know what students do? They see that person's and they go back to their website on their own and they start updating their site. They start revising it. They start changing their verbiage. They start changing their punctuations. They start writing in a bit more detail because they want to have that esteem too, but they also have an exemplar. So now what they end up doing is they end up practicing these literacy skills, but they're intrinsically motivated to do it because they can see an output for a genuine audience that they really want to show. Plus teachers, parents, all of these different stakeholders can see this website. And since it's not a high stakes thing, and since students can always go back and do it again, they don't feel discouraged if it's not perfect the first time.
Eric, can I say something really quick?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. So all of those little literacy skills, listening, speaking, reading, writing, what you just explained, kids were both developing them and using them to become, using them to learn. So it's the reciprocal thing, right? They're both teaching and learning in the same sort of process. Kudos to you. That's amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the fun thing is it's so organic. They are motivated to do it. It's not something that they feel forced to do. So it's this beautiful synergy of actually watching them develop these literacy skills, but they don't realize it. Plus, they're low-key developing a technical skill of building a website. This is for many of them the first time they've ever developed a website. So now they're producing content and not just reading it or watching it on their phone. If you want to take it to the next level, you can show them how to buy their own domain name. I tell all of my students, I buy all their domain names because I know they're going to be famous and successful, and then they can buy it back for me for 10%. I get a little cut. So it's a little joke we got going on. Next, and this is something that really takes a partnership in a school culture, but I've found so much value in this when I've had the opportunity to work with teachers on this, is interdisciplinary lessons. When you expose students to diverse texts, media, different types of communication, as Susan illustrated, the word spring, how are we using that? When students can see text in different environments, and especially in the US education, we're very siloed, they're able to make these connections across content areas. They're able to transfer knowledge back and forth, and we see their skills develop. One of the things that we know, especially for Common Core in the US, is that by grade 4, 50% should be text of nonfiction. Guess what team I'm supporting with nonfiction text? I'll say, hey, look, hey, English teachers, you need some nonfiction text? I got you. I got you covered. Hey, would you read this article on human metabolism? By the way, this is a nonfiction text for your students. Would you have them read it? And then when they come to me, we're going to read it like a scientist. We're going to read it through different eyes. They get so excited when they see the same content in different classes. And the reason why is because they get to practice the same skill without having to learn new content knowledge, but they're practicing the same skill of literacy development. So I get to practice the same close reading. I get to do think alouds and annotations, and I get to do think pair shares. But then when I go to Mr. Cross's class or my science class, it's the same information, but I look at it from a different lens, so I understand it differently. And when you're able to work together with another content teacher, it's like magic. Now, if you're an elementary school teacher, you have it better because you get to take your reading and you are the other content specialist. So you can just take this text and look at it through a different lens or use your science text to do your nonfiction reading. So you get creative control over all of that, which is amazing. Another opportunity that you have is science seminars. Now, these are student-run seminars where they're using evidence to explain their thinking. So this is where a lot of the speaking comes in. Now, one thing I want to say first is this protocol needs to be taught and practiced before I think it could be successfully applied, at least if you're teaching middle schoolers. You need to do it in a situation, in a context that's really simple, like what is your favorite food? Once you do that and you build this culture of a science seminar, the things that students say are amazing. You watch them be able to listen and speak and disagree without being disagreeable. They're engaged. And with students who need extra support, you can have pre-written sentence frames so that they're able to participate in the conversation. And when they're listening to other students speaking, that's helping them develop that language, those language skills. So science seminars are something that we do at the end of a unit. We usually take a debatable topic. We encourage students to be open-minded in their approach to listen to one another. And if anything, even if their opinions don't change, they're learning how to engage in a debate and how to disagree without being disagreeable, which we know as adults is a valuable skill to have, but isn't one that we were explicitly taught necessarily when we were in school. This next practice is one that I actually did today before I got here, so about 3 hours ago when I was in school. This is called Thin Slides. It's an edu protocol by a guy named John Carippo. And what you do is you have a slide deck. And on the slide deck, students have to put one word, one picture, one slide, and then they present for 1 minute. Now, it's called an edu protocol because you do the same thing multiple times for different topics. And this is a great way to elicit prior knowledge. Now, today, what I did is I asked them their favorite food because I wanted them to practice the process. Tomorrow, I'm going to ask them what's their favorite protein. And they're going to enter into the slides. And so let me demonstrate what it looks like. When I open the slide deck, there are 36 slides that look like this. And the first procedure I tell my students is to pick a slide. Now, those of you who might teach students and you're like, oh, they're going to write on every other one. That's the first skill to teach. Once they pick a slide and they write their name in the green box, then all they have to do is put a picture, put a word and their name, and that's it. Now, the catch is it's timed. So they have no more than 4 to 5 minutes to do this. Then I change the sharing permissions so nobody can access it. So at first, it's editable by everybody. Everyone can see the slides, everyone enters, and then after 4 or 5 minutes, we end it. In the beginning, some students aren't going to finish, and that's okay because it's low stakes. The very beginning, first round, we did favorite food, but then when we get to the next one, they're going to take it a bit more seriously because they want to contribute. So let me show you a couple of things my students did today. So Melody did birria tacos. That was her favorite food. Leo, New York style slice of pizza. My favorite pizza place in New York is John's No Slices. Now, what students don't realize that they're doing, in addition to doing the simple literacy skills, they're collaborating digitally. They're all practicing good digital citizenship. But another thing they're doing is they're writing. One of the things that I was told by one of our para-educators is that students write more in Mr. Cross's class than in so many other classes. And we do labs. We do a lot of science, but they also write and they communicate and they present, because that's where the sense making comes from. So imagine doing this maybe twice a week, a thin slide, and you put a phenomenon, or you put an idea out there, and you tell students one slide, one word, and then we go through it all, and every student speaks on what they said. That would be a great maybe bell ringer or a way to activate prior knowledge. And then you could use this slide deck, put it somewhere as a resource for students to be able to look at later, where students could access that information. And when they look at protein, they could see 36 different ideas about protein that students put in there, or 36 ideas about the moon or ecosystems. This is a great way to support people who are people who are developing language. But it also lets some of your students who are higher, students who maybe are more advanced or accelerated, they get to do maybe some fun stuff on these slides. They get to be creative. Maybe they put a GIF in there instead of a picture. There's all kinds of ways that my students have found to express their creativity and show their knowledge while staying within the kind of boundaries of it. A few other tools I'd like to share. One is flip.com. If you're not familiar with flip.com, this is a website where you can create a classroom and students can record videos of themselves presenting. You can control who sees it. You can also control the duration, and they have little emojis and all kinds of things. And the reason why I like this is before students present in my classroom live in front of people, they always record it first. And our very first assessment, they have to write a script and then record it. Now, no one else sees it because I don't want them to be intimidated or nervous or feel judged. I say no one sees it but Mr. Cross. But once they get comfortable being able to write a script and read it and do it on video, you know what ends up happening? They do it multiple times. They iterate because they watch the video, they don't like it, they go back and revise their script and they record it again. What they're doing organically is they're practicing mastery. They're asking for feedback. They're updating it. They're changing things. And so on their own, they're making it better. This is no different for my students that are developing and trying to reach maybe a higher grade level in their reading skills or writing skills, and my advanced students. This hits across the spectrum. Next is an activity called Blookit, or Blookit. If you haven't used this, this is one that it gamifies vocabulary and knowledge. But the neat thing about it that makes it different from maybe Kahoot or Gimkit or quizzes is that just because you're the best or most advanced, it doesn't mean you're going to get first place. And that's a big deal for any educator, because one of the biggest challenges and discouragements from game-based learning in programs like this is that usually the most knowledgeable student is the one that wins, which makes sense, but it's discouraging if you aren't a student that is at that level. The neat thing with Blookit is that there are certain games that students can hack each other and swap places with the first place and the last place person. So it motivates them to get answers right because they want to take the first person's spot. And if you want to try this out, I would recommend the game called Crypto Hack in Blookit. There's a number of different kind of activities you can do, but Crypto Hack is by far has the highest engagement and it's the most fun. And I've noticed a massive difference with engagement and vocabulary learning and development with my students when I do this game with them. And this is something I've just been doing for the last 2 weeks. The last thing I want to point out just in general is artificial intelligence. We would do you a disservice if we said it wasn't a game changer. And I just want to put in one kind of plug of one way that you can use it. We could do a whole seminar on AI. Actually, we have. We could do multiples. But one of the ways to use AI in a way that's practical is take what Susan and I are talking about and go into one of the language learning models, ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, and simply put in what you want. In this example, in this prompt, I said, you're a K-8 teacher in rural Iowa, preparing a science lesson for 4th grade students about food webs. You want to access their prior knowledge to help with understanding. What topics or ideas will be relatable to students in this region? Folks, we are all over the world, and there is no way all of us are culturally proficient with everyone globally. It's not reality. We don't control who we serve in our classroom. We just know that our responsibility is to serve them as best we can. We now have a tool where we could ask questions about the group of students in front of us to help bridge that gap from where we're coming from to where they are and helping to meet them where they're at. So what if I ask questions about prior knowledge? Or what if I ask questions about how to make this physics activity more relatable? Or about the invasive species in a certain region? Or about how to connect physics to kids growing up in the Bronx? I actually asked that question talks about subways and basketballs and all kinds of different things. If we all did that, how much better would it be, or how much would our science teaching or our relatability to our students improve? Even if it's just a few notches, that's a few notches closer and a few more students that we can connect with. Couple creative activities before we get to Q&A. All of these are free. None of these are things that I made up. And if you need access to them, we can give you the resources. The first one is the Netflix show. So again, how do we create meaningful activities where our students are practicing reading, writing, speaking, and listening in a science context? Well, one of them is the Netflix show. So the prompt is, work together as a table group to create a title page and episodes for a new show based on the articles you read. So in my class, students read 4 different articles about asthma, pancreas injury, diabetes, and anemia. I gave them a Netflix template, which was just a slideshow. This is just a little GIF of Netflix. And this is what one of the groups made. They made the little profile image. This one was called Shrek's Journey because I teach 7th graders and Shrek is a staple of 7th grade. They rewrote the description and then they wrote brand new episodes. There were groups of 4 and each student wrote a different episode. This could be done with any topic. And so many of our kids know Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus. They were so excited to do a creative writing activity about science. And so in this, they worked together, they changed the background images, and then they got up and they presented them to the class. This group actually made a trailer. I'm not going to play it, but they made a trailer in iMovie. And so it was a neat trailer. Oh, well, I guess there's kind of like, there's the actual trailer to the show. And then they had to present to the class. So these are my student groups presenting their Netflix show, and they're pitching it to me, the Netflix executive, as to why I should pick up their show. Now, in this, they're using academic language. They're showing me their understanding of the concepts and of the article. They're showing me that they can communicate. And what students who are watching are doing is they are giving feedback to the group. Each time a group presents, every other group gives feedback. And what the group ends up doing is going back and revising things. Hey, your episode didn't actually talk about the science concept. Hey, the font is too small. They're hyper specific, by the way. The letters aren't aligned exactly the way it is. That feedback, they take seriously from their peers. In the writing, they develop, I've watched them multiple times go through this process because they want it to be good. And then by the time they're done, it goes on their digital portfolio. So once they're finished, they just embed the slides in their digital portfolio as their Netflix show. And this one, Oliver did Many Things Matter. Welcome to the edginess of 7th grade. And then last, creative activities, molecule stories. And this one, shout out to the Amplify Science Facebook community group for this template. I did not invent this. Some amazing teacher put it on there. Students write stories from the perspective of a molecule getting consumed. This one's about pasta. So the pasta was getting consumed and they personified the pasta to get eaten. And then they had to do a dramatic reading. Now you notice they highlighted all of the vocabulary terms. So that was a rule. You have to use all of these words, but create a story. And the wilder the story, the better. They also did one about salmon and then one about air in a child's bedroom being breathed in. And these stories are all over the place. But you know, one of the great things is that they use all the vocabulary terms in context. And it helped for them develop that schema, develop that academic language. And then I let them sit in my big chair. So I have a big chair in my classroom. I call it the normal size chair. I put in a fireplace in the background with a YouTube video, and they rotate their screens on their Chromebook and they read it like a book, and it's story time. So every group chooses one person to read the story dramatically. Susan, do you want to jump in on this one?
I want to tell you a fun fact. Do you know that what we know about kids and their writing is that narrative, the narrative is much easier for students because they come in already knowing narrative, right?
Yes.
So to put narrative together with these science terms and everything, brilliant, brilliant.
You don't understand how good it feels to have Susan Lambert validate your literacy skills. Like we need to do this webinar like every week. All right. So this is George doing his reading. Now, I just want to show you a couple data points because I'm a science teacher. Before we wrap up for Q&A. These are our ELA state testing results from 2017, 2018. My grade level, I am the only science teacher. We are in the middle. What you're going to notice is that between 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, there was a bump in met or exceeded standards. This is 18-19. You'll see 6th grade went from 44%, 7th grade 58%, 8th grade 54%. The higher the number, the better. There was a gap because of COVID. We didn't do state testing in California, so you'll notice that 2021 is gone. This is 21 to 22. You'll notice a 7% jump. Now, during this time, me as a science teacher is working with the English and language teachers to apply these literacy skills across our content areas. And then last year, 6th grade to 7th grade, it's almost a 30% jump. That trend is undeniable. And one of the reasons why, not only do we have a phenomenal English team, but as a science teacher, helping and working together across content and having the students apply these skills, but in a meaningful context where they make sense of their science learning in an engaging way where they can communicate, help support them in other classes. And so I just wanted to share some of that data just so you can see that there is actually meaningful data, at least for my school anecdotally with my students. And for me as the only science teacher, I'm the only one kind of doing this. So hopefully some of those things might be useful. We have about 10 minutes, so I wanted to stop sharing. There's a lot of things in the chat. So questions?
Somebody wants those Netflix instructions. Is there someplace we can get them, those instructions for that?
Yeah,
Netflix
I actually put them on my
thing?
slides, so I'll drop them in the chat.
Awesome. That's amazing. Somebody loved playing the crypto hack with their students. So just so you know, right? That's great. What about other questions? I don't know. I don't see any right now. Shannon's back up though. Do you see some?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, that's the Netflix template was the biggest question. A lot of people want that. And I don't think I saw a whole lot of other one. There was one question that came up. See if I can open up Q&A again. So there's none of the Q&A yet, but thank you, Jessica. With your focus on literacy, what impact does it have on science assessment scores?
Yeah, Jessica, that's a great question. So in California, we assess in 5th grade and 8th grade. In 8th grade, it's comprehensive of all the disciplines. So it's a little bit harder to parse out, like how that's, and we don't do MAP scores for 7th grade. So I don't have any like quantitative data on that. It's a great question. It's one that I'm wondering myself. On science assessment scores, for my class, students generally perform well, but there are other reasons why they don't. There's other challenges. I don't exactly, I don't have an A/B comparison. Again, going back to like the science of me, like I don't want to speak out of turn. So that's a good question. I don't exactly know how it affects science assessment skills. I do know how it affects English literacy skills. They do grow in science. I have other data points, but I don't know if I could point to it being the literacy things that I'm doing, but it might be. I haven't looked at it that closely, but thank you. That's a great question.
It would, you know what, I have to jump in here because it would be really interesting to see how those intersect. Because so often we think of literacy skills are, well, that's just an ELA or whatever. But you're doing a lot with your kids in those classrooms, talking about, discussing, they're listening and giving feedback, they're reading about things and they're writing about things. And again, all of those things help them learn what they need to be learning. So I bet you anything, their content knowledge is also growing.
Yeah. So I'll just share this. The first assessment that I do is the microbiome unit, but I remixed it. So students have to do a CER and they have to explain what microorganisms are, why eating raw chicken would make you sick, and then why taking antibiotics before you were ill was bad. Now, it's not about right answers. I expect all of them to get right answers. What they need to do is back up every answer with evidence in a video. So they need to tell me microorganisms are really small things. In the microbiome article, it says that microorganisms, and so really I'm assessing a skill, not knowledge, because I expect them to know it's all over the book.
That's interesting.
But by the time they get to English, I'm usually the first teacher to teach CER in 7th grade. I teach it before English does.
We had a question in the Q&A. This person doesn't think this, but she's asking, do you think there's a limit to how young nonfiction reading should start?
I just did a podcast episode with, I think, Gina Cervetti. And I can't remember who it is. I don't even know if it's released yet, but there is no limit. And Susan Newman, who is an expert in knowledge building, I was just talking to her, I don't know, several weeks ago, and they're just coming off a research study where they worked with 3 and 4-year-olds and introduced them to concepts and informational text. And those kids actually grew in that. I mean, you think about the little ones; they love to be scientists and historians and know things. So there is no limit to that from my point of view.
And then there was one question way back in the beginning of the presentation that was in the chat. I'm interested since you're both on this. The current consensus among science educators is supportive of an inquiry model. The science of reading is tout the importance of direct, explicit instruction. Do you think these two approaches are at odds with one another? Do they compete, or can you? I mean, I think we've seen that you can use what you need to from both, but.
I mean, from my point of view, when we're talking about explicit and systematic instruction in the science of reading, we're often talking about those constrained skills, right? The skills of word recognition and getting kids to be word recognizers. Unconstrained skills in the language development side, those skills are developed over time with lots and lots and lots of exposure. And so I think we have to be really careful about applying one instructional strategy that may work to learn one thing very broadly across all content areas. And I often say, you don't want to teach science to kids just by reading to them or having them read. There's other ways that we need to learn that. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say for me, and this is just practically speaking, I try to have my students read, write, speak as often as I can. And then I pick and kind of triage the things that I really want to focus on. There's a lot of strategies that I can do, but then I'm going to get really deep into kind of the nuances of reading and writing. And that's not what I want to do, because we have an English team that will do that in more detail. But if I can get my kids to do this with frequency, and then maybe I'm identifying the key thing, even spelling and punctuation, I'm overlooking a lot of the time. I'm just wanting them communicating. And then there will be key things that I kind of hit on at certain points, because I know that some of these other skills are really going to get picked up on. So for me, it's both and. I'm really heavy into the science. And then when we need to drill down, maybe in an article, I might really focus on a couple things, but I probably am not doing it the same way maybe another teacher in ELA might be doing it.
I love that, because it's the goal of the lesson, the instructional strategy that you employ. So nicely said, Eric.
And it's like you two are professionals, because we have 2 minutes left and no questions. Perfect timing. So unless one pops up, we'll go ahead and go to do some more resources. You can hear more from Eric. He's actually going to be on a literacy webinar next week, another science reading webinar, Beyond the Science Lab, Building Knowledge Across Curriculum. So you can click that link. Ryan just dropped them in the chat. You can find more classroom resources through our Science and Literacy poster pack. This is something we had in the spring, and I know a lot of people loved it. It really shows different literacy moves you can take to strengthen your science classroom and practices. You can explore ways to champion science with UC Berkeley's Lawrence Hall of Science. We just released a guide with them. Would love for you to check it out. And if you're a current Amplify Science user, we'd love for you to join our Facebook community. This is the one Eric mentioned in the presentation. Lots of fun stuff in there. Like you've seen, there's templates, activity suggestions, horror stories, success stories, lots of good conversations to be a part of. Would love for everyone to join. And that is a wrap. That's all we got today. So thank you so much, Susan and Eric. This was amazing. I hope we do this again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.